Let's talk, if we can, about leaseholders, because when I spoke to the Housing Minister, Matthew Pennycook, it was about a month ago, I left under the impression that the business of leaseholding, which many people who are in properties that are leasehold feel are bitterly unfair. I thought the problem was about to be solved. And indeed, Pennycook was in Parliament addressing some of the concerns that people had as recently as Thursday. Why hasn't the problem been resolved? And perhaps more personally, what is the issue with leaseholding? Well, Henry Scoffin is founder of Free Leaseholders. He joins me now. Morning, Henry.
Thanks very much for covering this very important story.
My pleasure. Let's work backwards if we can. What's the problem with leaseholding?
So the problem with leaseholding is that when you buy a home, typically it's a flat, you don't actually have control over its running costs. So we're unlike basically Scotland and the rest of the world, where when you buy a property, you own it outright. And then you're a little bit like Lord Sugar on The Apprentice. If someone's ripping you off, you go, you're fired. And you get in a better managing agent with your neighbours. And obviously it's a democratic structure. So you and your neighbours, there'll be a board of directors. You appoint that board of directors among yourselves. And then there'll be an annual general meeting. But you don't live under a landlord. And that's a really key thing. Because in England, Wales, actually under the law, you might think you're a homeowner, but you're actually a tenant. And with that comes all the vulnerabilities of being a tenant. And you've got a landlord that's running around spending your money. Sometimes these landlords are offshore. You definitely, in a lot of cases, can't ever get rid of them. And you're basically trapped. So that's a real issue of leasehold. You don't get the control and ownership that you thought you were buying.
And what about from the leaseholder's perspective? Because I've been hearing sort of ever louder rumours that some of our biggest landowners, property portfolio holders, people who might benefit from leasehold arrangements, are looking at challenging the government's proposed legislation. What are they? I mean, presumably it's all about money, Harry.
That's what I'd say. So the big freeholding interests, they're already suing the government in the High Court under the European Convention of Human Rights, can you believe? And they're basically saying the law that was passed under the last government by Michael Gove is somehow confiscatory and against their property rights. But the reality is, this is a multi-billion-pound industry that's not going to roll over anytime soon. And the government obviously slipped out an announcement as a parliamentary written statement, hoping that you journalists probably wouldn't be able to cover it. And we're obviously gutted because the last government buried us under consultations for 7 years. And we're now getting that again. And the real concern is, and obviously I've got to be careful with what I say on live radio here, but basically people are arming up and getting the best lobbyist money can buy. And us leaseholders, we don't have professional lobbyists. So I do this full time. My mum's impacted. And the reality is, we've got to ask ourselves a question here. Who matters in this society? Is it the voters? Is it the taxpayers?
Rich people. I know it's rich people. They're the ones that matter. This whole country's set up for rich people.
But the reality is, there are...
I got a smile at least.
But there are over 5 million leasehold households. We have a vote.
Gosh.
Many of us moved from voting Conservatives, sometimes lifelong Conservatives, to Labour at the general election on this pledge alone. And what we're really concerned about is Labour making themselves politically vulnerable. This is a cost of living crisis. Research by Labour Together, the leading Labour-aligned think tank, found that basically the number one issue for Labour voters at that election was cost of living. And those voters expect meaningful change within 2 years. And yet we get an announcement a few days ago that says they're punting this towards the end of the Parliament. But what's so bizarre is most of the policy work's been done by the Law Commission 4 years ago. And then you see in the media, and I'm really glad you did ask the minister about this, because he doesn't seem to really want to talk to grassroots groups at the moment, what's going on with the lobbying. And it was widely reported, I'm not breaking any confidences here, that obviously our man, soon-to-be man in Washington, Peter Mandelson, has been hired, or his lobbying firm Global Counsel, to lobby for one of the biggest ground rent grazing firms in the country. And in their accounts on the 4th of September, they said that Labour's promised draft leasehold and commonhold reform bill could have major impacts on their business model. And they had hired this firm. So, that is a big issue. And beyond that, when the announcement was made, yes, there are a few, so-called leaseholder groups that are trotting out the government line. But the reality is you've just got to look at industry. They were licking their lips. You've got the big freeholder group, the Residential Freehold Association. They said they're basically relieved that the government have seen the complexity of this. You've then got the RICS, who have been supporting leasehold for generations, the surveyors. So you've got everyone coming out. And we're the only group now there in existence that is saying more jam tomorrow. Leaseholders cannot afford another 4 to 5 years of waiting. A military veteran at 78 years old going back to work at Morrison's because he can't afford his service charges. What is going on here? The Prime Minister has got a phenomenal legal brain. This is a legal issue. Yes, it's a moral one, but look at what they're doing with assisted dying.
Harry, he keeps telling us, the Prime Minister, he has to make difficult decisions, but none of the decisions that I think that are truly difficult, that require sort of prime ministerial intervention, he never seems prepared to actually make the really difficult decisions. He seems very quick to keep the very wealthy happy. And Harry, I think you're doing an outrageously good job on behalf of your leaseholders there. Your anger and your passion and your truth coming through loud and clear. Thank you for that.